Jennifer, can you call roll for us, please?
For the State Controller, Ms. Paquin. And for the State Treasurer, Mr. Rufino. Here. Ms. Higa. Here. Ms. Yamamoto.
Here.
Ms. Hendricks.
Here.
For the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mr. Yamanaka. And for the Director of Finance, Ms. Lee. And Chairperson Dillon, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I appreciate it. Alrighty, in front of you, in addition to our regular materials, we have a new bill. It's AB 1320, so you should have a copy of that at your seat, and also a revised board education sheet. And with telling you about that, I'd entertain a motion to approve the board agenda with flexibility. Move. So it's been moved and seconded. Are there any comments? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed nay. Any abstentions? We've approved our agenda with flexibility. I like having the flexibility.
Yeah.
No doubt we usually use it.
We usually need it.
All righty. Jack, let's go straight to item number 2, and you can give us an update on our calendar.
Yeah, actually, first, I did want to make sure everyone, I know the board knows because I sent them a note late last night.
I forgot.
But-
I'm so sorry. Thank you for saying that.
That's why he's the CEO.
Should I say
Good
it?
job. No, yes, go on. Yes.
But I did want to make sure the audience knew that we do have an appointment from the governor to our board, and that is William, hopefully I'm pronouncing his name, Prezant, Prezant, from San Francisco. And as I said, the appointment came through late yesterday afternoon, so unfortunately his schedule didn't allow him to be with us today. But he indicated he was going to try and log in and look at the video, so he might be watching us right now. Mr. Prezant has been a partner at a law firm since 1987. He was a member of the Hamburg Partners Holding Board of Directors from 14 to 17. He's Director of Forward Management from 2005 to 2016. He's a member of the Strategic Hotels and Resort Board of Directors from 2006 to 2015, and he has a law degree from Georgetown University Law Center. So obviously a lot of business experience in his background. So good addition to the board. He indicated he would be joining us in May, so he's excited about being part of the group.
And you gave him a heads up that we'd be contacting him about orientation and stuff?
Oh, Danielle contacted him within like seconds. So
Thanks, Danielle.
So yeah, we're working with him now on the schedule for orientation, all those things. Then the calendar, we just have one very slight change that I think we vetted as best as we could with you all. And that was to make an adjustment in the September meeting. But you do formally adopt the calendar, so we would need you to vote on this. And I just had one thought I was just thinking about too, about May. I just want to mention it, Dana. For all the board, remember in May is the month you elect your officers to the board. And then the meeting after that is July, when you do work plans and start out the year. But the way the July calendar is, I went through with the executive staff the other day. We do have a number of committee meetings in July as well. It's probably a two-day board meeting in July. So my question is, in May, in addition to electing the new officers for the board, you solicit the input of the other board members for what committees they would like to be on. And, you know, over the next 10 days, they send in their forms to you. When we start July, were you picturing you'd make a decision, the chair, between that and the July board meeting? I think everyone needs to know, is it the newly formed committees that meet in July, or will it be the people that are on them now? Because with all the new board members, you might have some switching of interests going on and what committees people want to be on. So I don't know if you want to answer that, but you want to think about that, because we need to know who's going to be on those committees in July when we actually start the meetings, because the meetings will be before the board meeting probably. I know did I make that too confusing?
No, personally, I think if the committee meetings are going to be held before the board meeting in which the new committee structure is approved, then we probably should leave it the committees that are in existence as they are today. But if we're going to,
Okay.
if, I think process-wise, I think that makes sense. Historically, whatever committee anybody's wanted to be on,
I know.
they've gotten
It works
on it.
out.
So it's kind of superfluous, I guess, to do it that way.
It is,
If you
but
wanna
now
be on-
you've got that participation guideline you use now, so it's a
Yeah.
little, it has a little more importance than it did in the past.
So,
Just want to make sure everyone feels good with that approach, since, we've got at least 3 or 4 committees meeting that month.
yeah, let it, before we make a solid decision, let's think about it and
Okay.
maybe in our self-evaluation
Okay.
time that we have today, we could discuss it a little bit more and see what other members of the board wanted to do.
All right.
Okay.
The only committee I can think of that had a hearty agenda potentially would be the comp committee. So you'd want to think about that, who's chairing that and how that works. Okay,
All right. Thanks, Jack. So.
so this is an action item.
Do you want to talk about the change?
Oh,
So the
just
changes
that,
in
it
September?
seemed like when we were clearing calendars that we
There
were
was a-
able to clear that September 4th and
Yeah,
6th
there was
date
a co- there
with
had to
everyone.
be a
That's the
conflict.
only change for the whole calendar year, otherwise it works. And we have, again, one offsite as planned, unless you feel otherwise. We were probably thinking again of the San Diego office for that, but
San Diego offsite, okay.
yeah,
So the July,
Go ahead, Karen.
September.
so the
Did I say
July
September?
board meeting then will be the 3 days?
I'm sorry.
10th, 11th, 12th. July,
You referred earlier in your conversation that the July board meeting would be 2 days, but
Right, we
have
always
3
reserve
scheduled.
3, just in
just
case
in
something
case.
happens. Now, it could be it could turn out, Karen, that the appeals committee might hit that 3rd day, depending, if we remember for the new fiscal year, you kind of thought, well, you might have it on schedule, but you also might be more flexible, is what you decided. So who's ever going to be the new appeals, who's ever the chair for the appeals committee, I think we want to talk to that person and find out, would they like that adjoined to that meeting or in a separate schedule apart. But right now, in terms of the other committees, it looks like you could do it in 2 days, so that would be 10th and 11th. Yeah.
all righty. Any other questions about the calendar? Entertain a motion to approve the changes. Moved by Karen, seconded by Lynn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Thank you for approving that change in the calendar. All righty. Amy, Jan? So now we're going to take a look at our strategic plan.
Well, good morning, Madam
Good
Chair,
morning.
members of the board. I'm Amy McDuffie with Mosaic Governance Advisors. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, in particular as we're rounding the corner with respect to the CalSTRS strategic plan for the next 3 fiscal years. And we talked about this at the last board meeting, but it's been about a year of a year-long journey in the development of this strategic plan. And of course, Jan Spano is here with me of the Enterprise Strategy Management Team, and the team itself has been my collaborative partner as we have developed this, and particular worked with executive staff and you, the board, of course, in making sure that we're looking forward into the future and that the plan itself is strategic and it's not just a to-do list, which other public retirement systems can sometimes find themselves documenting instead of truly strategic direction. So before I turn it over to Jan, who is here to talk about the updates that have been made since the first reading that we had, I just wanted to provide some higher level context. And that was, it struck me as I looked at your strategic plan again that what a truly exciting time it is to be at CalSTRS. You look at all of the areas that this plan covers, and suffice it to say, I don't think there's any major initiative that the organization is embarking on or will be embarking on that isn't covered in your strategic plan. I think that's so important because ultimately what the strategic plan clicks into is the budget, the operational budget that the organization is working on, staffing changes, growth in staff, the talent and how you're developing and training your staff to accompany these new creations that are being brought into life by the organization. And so, again, when I tried to step back and look at this after this year-long process that we've been through, that was the feeling that I got, is that it's an exciting time to be at CalSTRS. The other thing I just wanted to note, and I mentioned this just briefly, but as you look across the spectrum as a practitioner who helps with strategic planning on a regular basis. This is truly a plan that identifies that forward look. And one of the biggest elements that this plan includes this time that it hasn't before is an articulated vision of success. And that was a consensus dialogue that the board had along with staff. And I think for any internal staff looking at this plan, as well as your constituent groups and outside stakeholders, it gives them a good idea of what is being worked on by the organization and when, what are the priorities that are being devoted resources, or to which I should say resources are being devoted to. So again, this is not only driving the next 3 years, it's also driving the board's work plan, right? And in fact, staff has already started working to develop those, as well as the business plan. And that's that year-to-year snapshot of what individual activities will be worked on in order to forward the objectives in the strategic plan. Ultimately, that links back to the accomplishments report that the board receives every fall as you think about the performance evaluation of your chief executive officer. So that's the framework and the importance of this strategic plan. I know staff has already started working on the business plan, and so many of the refinements or additional edits that you see in the strategic plan are just due to that. As you go through and create that companion document, you start to notice, well, which things are really strategic and need to be in the strategic plan versus which of those are operational and are better left for the business plan. So with that backdrop, Jan, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you today again, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the board. As Amy mentioned, we were here in January for the first reading of the strategic plan. We took your direction, your input, and just to refresh your memory, you asked for us to specify where we mention employers throughout goal 2 and 3. What did we mean by that? And so you'll see a distinction between district employers and employer report sources included in there. We also looked at baselines more carefully and did some work there. One of the outcomes of that, a more significant outcome, you'll notice in goal 1 with the objective, we had a measure around the CalSTRS collaborative model. And when looking at that more carefully, we realized that would do better as an objective. And so that's a new objective D on goal 1, really to reflect the significance of the work that needs to be done with the CalSTRS collaborative model. And as Amy mentioned, during this time, as part of our normal business cycle, in order to prepare a business plan that we would share with you come July, we've already begun work on developing initiatives. And so through that process, we did additional refinements. Some places we said, hey, this is really more belongs on a business plan as an initiative with a begin date, end date, and key activities around it. And so some of those will be moved. The only other main thing slight thing I want to point out, because it will be different, we're going to make one change, and that is we didn't catch we were changing something from the year 2020 to the year 2021 as a target. It's small, and I want to call it out because we'll be making that, and that's on goal 1, objective E, measure 3. So staff felt that it was more realistic to give 2.5 years for that, and we had not caught that and left it at 18 years. Otherwise, this document, 18 months, right. Otherwise, this document reflects what staff recommendations of what we've heard from the board as their priorities, what you'd like to see accomplished over the coming 3 years, and aligned with the resource management. It reflects the same broad, we've maintained the same broad strategic focus on funding and the investment returns on the project success, while staying attuned to the changing digital environment, serving our members, and business process improvement to strengthen our organization. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Madam Chair, for any discussion.
All right, I have some questions.
Great.
Nobody else is in line, so I guess I'll start. Maybe other people will chime in. going back to talking about the collaborative model, I had a question of Chris, I guess. So Chris, the target is greater than 45%. And understanding that this is a 3-year plan.
I'm bringing Deborah, who's worked on it.
Okay. Understanding that this is a 3-year plan, so that's pretty short because of where we are within transitioning to that. I'm just wondering, how, it was my understanding that right now about 45% of our assets are internally managed. So if our target is 45%, should that be a different number? Do we want it the same as it is now, or do we want to ratchet up just a little bit more to have a higher target?
You can sure ratchet, sorry, Chris Elman, Chief Investment Officer of the fund. Good to see everybody. You're right. Right now, we stand at about 45. It depends on the denominator and what's going on. But that's why we put equal to or greater than. I think we've
Okay,
talked about
that makes
soft
sense.
landing around 60, 65%, but that'll depend on the time frame. So it's greater, staying at and above greater than 45 and growing.
That makes sense, not falling below that.
Right.
Okay, all right, that works. Yeah, the greater than or equal to, yeah, all righty. Thank you, that's, I think that's all I had for investments. I just wanted to make sure we had the right. Okay, go ahead, Chris. Or Scott. That's okay.
I think it's worth noting as part of some of the objectives and measures and the plans and goals that one of them relates to how we're going to start to measure and account for the collaborative model in different ways, because the number that was stated by Chris is our public assets. And as we move more into co-investments, the purchase of general partnerships, joint ventures, we're going to have to develop a different set of reporting and measurement tools in order to start to account for that. So
that number's gonna naturally grow larger.
it'll grow
as we change
larger
that.
as we develop these measurement techniques to account for it better. And so part of, I think Deborah, you might mention a little bit.
Sure, Deborah Smith, Chief Operating Investment Officer. So as Scott and Chris mentioned, we're going to have a opportunity to define internal management beyond the public markets. And so we're going to have to, as a staff, what does internal management mean for private assets? Is that 50% of the private assets we own? Is that 90%? So that's something that we will determine, bring to you. So our reporting, particularly in the investment cost report, is going to drive that definition.
Okay, very cool, thank you.
Madam Chair, may I just add
Sure.
to this point, because it extends beyond investments. And that's the fact that, the strategic plan is really a vehicle to bring new initiatives to life within the organization. And so it's very common to see performance measures and targets change after that 3-year period or even further down the road. And that's because there may not be a measurement methodology that exists right now to define that new project or the outcome associated with the new project. And it's not just in the investment area, but there are other areas as well. As we started circling back and having deeper conversations around baselines, I think that's an important point to keep in mind.
Yeah,
Thank you.
maybe just to step back, if I could make one more point
Sure.
about the collaborative model. And I think what makes the collaborative model unique is that, first of all, the objective for us is to benefit from internal management, right? To save costs, to hopefully look for better return opportunities and control the risk. Most people associate that with building your own internal team and managing everything internally. But we've defined it more strategically because we don't think that in all cases we can build our own internal team, right? So we're going to collaborate with our peers. We're going to collaborate with our partners. We'll do joint ventures with peers. We'll do co-investments. We'll buy general partners and investment management companies. Where it's not practical for us to build a team of 1,000 people, right? It's better for us to purchase that necessarily than to build it internally. And so that definition is going to require we're defining that but the way we are, but we're going to have to figure out the measurement tools to get there.
Right. That makes sense. Thank you, Scott.
Yep.
Right. Then, and if we talked about this back in January, I apologize. We're removing the target of linking, hyperlinking with employer websites. We're totally removing that. Is that because?
Yes, and that's an example, well, there's a couple of things. It's an example of something we are moving to the business plan.
Got it.
So one idea is that is more of an initiative to really create a plan around how can we do it and how is it realistic to accomplish it.
All right, that totally makes sense. All righty, anybody else?
I'll just make a quick comment.
Sure. Sharon?
I'll just make a quick comment. I don't have a lot of feedback. I personally just looking, I mean, strategic plans can be pretty dull, honestly, and they can be fairly, we have to do them and we get it. But I've been part of this, these processes in other contexts, and it's like, you have to do it, check the box, we got it. But I love our strategic plan because I'm reading every objective and going, yeah, that's exactly right. That's what we're thinking about. That's what we're talking about. Even just with the first goal, it's like full funding is number one, right? Number 1A is full funding. B is ESG, looking at cost, the collaborative model, board governance. Just in that first section, to me, I just appreciate that it's easy to understand. Our members can read this and go, this is what we're going to spend the next 3 years working on. 3 years, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I like how clear and concise it is, and I think it really captures, I think anyone could read this and just have a really clear understanding of this is our focus, these are our goals, and it actually reflects, I think, like our investment beliefs conversation, a lot of our values as a board. So I don't know if we're getting better at it now or what, but this one seems more like succinct and clear and
Very
I
well
get it.
done.
I
Cassandra?
appreciate that, Sharon, because just with investments coming up, and I appreciate that, and the enthusiasm they have about the work that they're being done, because it's captured in what we're doing, and this is a real document. This is a real working document that we are executing on a daily basis, and it's drilled down all the way through the business areas. You're exactly right, it is not something that's just compiled and put on the shelf. We look at it, everything that we're doing is, it's a real document, and so, and there's a lot of work from Jan's staff that I really appreciate her staff, doing all the work and helping us prepare this, so I just wanted to recognize her.
Absolutely. It's well done.
Jan and Lori that works for Jan come to our executive staff meeting each week now and laboriously make us go through each goal and objective and discuss them. And
Oh, don't make that sound so painful.
well, it's
You're
because
taking the enthusiasm out of
it's
my
because of
comments.
what it's because what Sharon said, which we shared too. It is strategic planning is one of the most important things you do, but everyone doesn't want to do it. There's an irony around this whole concept, and this is the first time I would say that we've done it with this level of thoroughness. And Dana, you've been here long, where we've had some hard moments with board actually saying, "What is this our job? Should we do this as well?" And so,
We used to.
I was here for
Yeah.
We used to.
so there's been a level of collaboration and
And
rolling
I
up your
really miss
sleeves
it.
that we've never had before. So I'm very enthused about the plan. Actually, it really does reflect a lot more input. And Deborah's been part of our executive staff meeting now and really does dig in as Cassandra said, so that's had a level of presence in the plan we didn't have before, for sure. So
Very good.
I appreciate everyone's commitment to it in the organization.
I think the board appreciates it as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jan. I don't have anybody else to talk, so yay, we're almost back on time. Thank you, Amy.
But
Thank you, Jan.
this is an action
Oh,
item.
it is an action item. See, I'm just ready to go, try to get back on time. So entertain a motion to approve the strategic plan. Moved by Sharon, seconded by Joy. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Any abstentions? We're moving forward.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair.
Go forth and make those work plans now, right?
Meet those
All righty.
targets.
Grant, and Joycelyn? And I'll try to remember that this is an action item too.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Grant Boykin, Public Affairs Executive Officer. Just wanted to call out one thing to your attention. We had on the agenda in the matrix, there is AB 1320 by Nazarian, a bill on Turkish divestment. Because of the timing of when the current language came out and because of the timing of our deadlines for getting board materials, we hadn't planned on requesting action on that one, but we had a board member request that we do have action, that the board consider taking action or a position on that bill today. So we do have an analysis at the back of the room. There should be one on your dais.
Yep.
And I don't know when you want to take that up.
Let's
Chair?
do everything that we have in print in our board book first, and then we'll come to the Nazarian at the end.
Sounds good.
All right.
So Joycelyn?
Great. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Starting at the top, AB 181 by Assemblymember Rodriguez, the chair of the Assembly Public Employment and Retirement Committee, is a bill that requires a report on our emerging managers and has some specifics that are listed in the bill. And I'm pleased to let you know that the bill actually has been amended. As you know, the recommended position was supportive amended with 4 amendments listed in the analysis. The chair has accepted all 4 of the amendments and they are currently in print. So I'd like to change the staff recommendation to support. I also want to note that the sunset date was removed from the bill, and we generally appreciate sunset dates because issues change over the years. However, with this bill, I think it is very broad and open to shifts that we may see in the future, so that we'll be able to adjust as it goes forward. So with that, I would entertain any questions.
So Chris, do you want to weigh in on the dampening effect that we were worried about?
I'm sorry,
The dampening effect that have on our investments, the detrimental effect?
yeah, no, I think, part of it's going to be that challenge. A big part of it for us is the definition. And that onus falls back to us to define it. Right now, under California's law and structure, we define emerging by size, by small manager. But I don't know if this bill is really just trying to adjust small managers. I think it's trying to get back to diversity, and that, as we've said, has really proven to be a challenge for us. We want to say diversity, yet we end up saying emerging. So I think that will be part of the challenge. Obviously, our procurement process, hiring small managers and young managers has proven to be a challenge for us over time. But we can report on it. And I think, I'm very concerned about the lack of a sunset date. I understand that this isn't an issue that's going to be resolved overnight, but as I point out to Grant, we're still doing reports that were created in the 1980s, because once you get a decade late, it's really hard to get to legislatures, and it's worrisome to have them change a bill. So we understand that, and I think we'll work with PERS, but we will be coming back to you. I don't have a time schedule yet, but with that tough task of figuring out in California now in this day and age, how do we define diversity? Because it's not just gender and ethnicity. I've heard lots of expanded definitions in this modern age. So we'll have to figure out and then work with our lawyers to figure out what we could do in California.
And because there's such a diverse opinion on what emerging means, is there a definition in the legislation?
There's
what
not.
the
They leave that
legislature
to
thinks
us.
it is?
No, they leave it to the boards to decide how they want to define it, which means that it can
They
adjust
So-
over
so-
time.
Punted it to you. So right now, our definition really revolves around by asset class. In private equity and in real estate, it's often defined by fund 1, 2, or 3. But you can have people raising $1 billion fund for the first fund if they're a giant, or even as one firm tried to raise a $100 billion fund, the first fund. So it's a tough way to define it. In fixed income and in public equity, we define it kind of by total assets under management. And we've received pushback on that because there are firms owned by a CEO who is either gender diverse or ethnic diverse, but has a large product and is starting a new product. Do we just consider the AUM of the new product, or we do consider the size of the firm? It just really gets hard and difficult. But I think the closer we can work with you to have a tight definition, we'll measure it, report it, and you know, as you know, we have emerging manager programs in just about every asset class. Not the newest ones that are tiny, but we're talking about it there. So we'll have good information to report out.
And it's entirely possible then that our sister fund across the river could have a totally different definition of emerging managers.
Yes.
We'd both be compliant with the bill. But
Yes,
it'd be dramatically different in the implementation of it.
Implementation, success, how you measure it, and their number and our number, because that's what it'll come down to, is measuring numbers. I've been doing a listening tour since last spring of going around to different affinity groups and different conferences. It's clearly across the country, the most activity has clearly been in Illinois. Their legislature took the step of actually literally defining what diversity meant in an investment management, and then all the funds have coalesced around that. Here, it's so problematic with Prop 209 and just the issues.
Okay.
So we've defined it by size, which obviously is not truly a measure of diversity.
All righty, thank you. And then, Joycelyn, the reference to the requirements under the Public Records Act, what is it that we asked for and what is it that we got?
So we just asked to reference the Public Records Act to the extent that it protects certain information from being released to the public. And so we just echoed that in this legislation.
And that'll help protect the entities that we hope to protect, Chris?
Correct. The concern has always been, we have no problem reporting at the general partner level, but it's the portfolio companies underneath that or some of the sub-manager relationships. And I think we'll be able to navigate it correctly now.
Okay. All righty. I think that's it for the questions that I had about it. Does anyone else have any questions? The recommendation is not support if amended as in our board book, but just a regular support. Entertain a motion. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any further discussions on the position for AB 181 support? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed nay. Any abstentions? We have one abstention. So Joycelyn, we've given you your support position.
Great, thank you.
Let's go on to the next one.
On to AB 706 by Assemblymember Lowe, and this goes toward the benefit side. This bill actually amends a law that is outside of the teacher's retirement law. There is a restriction on the length of time in which community college faculty have to transfer their sick leave to their next employer. But it does affect CalSTRS because sick leave at the end of a career, that remains can be converted to service credit. And so this bill is sponsored by the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges, and they see that there are challenges with community college faculty, especially adjunct and part-time faculty, being able to get their sick leave transferred within the 3-year period. So the bill proposes to remove that completely, along with some other requirements that are slightly different but related. This allows a member who has an earned benefit that is essentially funded by the 0.25% that employers pay as part of their contribution rate. This allows that to make sure to be moved forward, removes barriers, and that they otherwise would have been able to have count if they had utilized the if they had been able to utilize the time period in a timely manner. The recommendation is neutral. We think this is a fairly small population, so it wouldn't have a large impact on the system or the fund. There is a potential for an increased cost, and we can't give a total amount because we're not sure how much sick leave actually gets left behind in these situations. However, in that there is sick leave left behind, and then this bill allows it to be moved forward, the increases for the benefit is $3 per year for each additional day of unused sick leave. And again, that's because it's converted to service credit. With that, I'll entertain any questions.
I'll try to remember my question. You go ahead.
No, you can.
No,
okay,
go for
you're
it.
welcome
Go for
to.
it.
So I had a couple questions. I'm actually really excited about this bill because I work with a lot of part-time community college faculty, and I think it's an issue for them. We're saying neutral because there's potential cost to the system, right? Is that the reason why we're neutral and not support?
Basically, yes. So there's it is an earned benefit. So it's not a new benefit. It's not a retroactive benefit enhancement, but there could be a slight increase. We think it would be minimal. So because of that, it fits into the framework for neutral.
So I know in the language it talks about employers, it would require employers to track unused sick leave for current and past employees indefinitely. How hard is that for, how challenging is it for employers? Because I know sometimes part-timers are at, 5 different districts, or they're in Southern California, then they move to Northern California. I mean, how do you see this bill impacting employers' ability to track that sick leave for faculty?
So we don't actually know how employers track their sick leave necessarily. I mean, we're not involved in that as much.
Right. I know someone up there is listening and knows that, but yeah.
Because we rely on the employers to be able to track that, and then it gets reported to us at the end. But otherwise, there's not an interaction between us and the employers with that sick leave as it gets accrued and then used or transferred on. So that's kind of outside of our purview.
Right.
The Faculty Association of California Community Colleges has discussed this with the Community College League and hasn't heard any concerns back.
Okay.
So that's what I had heard from them. But
And they
otherwise,
track it for full-time faculty, but I know that a lot of full-time faculty stay in that district.
Right.
So I guess I'm just wondering logistically for employers how challenging it is to.
yeah, potentially it sounds like it could be challenging, but I don't think we know enough about how their systems work in that way. But thus far, that's what I had heard back from kind of the employer side via the sponsor of the bill.
Got it. And you were saying we really don't have any visibility around how much sick leave is being left on the table at this point. I just know it anecdotally from, a lot of part-time community college faculty, when they get ready to retire, they look back on their work history and they go, oh yeah, I was at Santa Monica College, I was at LACCD, my district. And they hear one of us or counselors talk about it, and they're like, oh, I had no idea sick leave had value for my retirement, that if you're in the defined benefit plan, that it converts to service credit. And then they go, oh, let me go back to those districts and make sure I get all that, unused sick leave. And most districts say, we don't have a record of, Frank, we don't have 20 years ago when you were at LACCD. And so it's a benefit that's sort of left on the table, in my view, for part-time community college faculty. So the other question I had was, let's see, educational issues. So if this were to be implemented, how do we educate? I know we have a little section around part-timers, right? Do we have in the membership handbook? I'm looking at you, Grant, because I assume, is there something, there's something in there about, sort of unused sick leave and making sure you take it with you, if you will, when you move districts?
And it explains that you can have the employers from your last year of credible compensation. If you have multiple employers, in the past it used to be your very last employer, which was complicated and awkward. So now that's been changed, so that's described and there's a form for it, and all of that's included in various publications.
Right. So obviously, if this law was implemented, that would be
updated.
It would be different.
Yeah, I think we could also look at, if the law does get enacted, we could look at different avenues for getting the word out too.
Right. That would be my only other comment, would just be to make sure when it's enacted, hopefully, that, we just make sure members are aware of that, because I think it's an area that I always hear it, when they're getting ready to retire, and I'd love our members to be educated about it while they're active faculty members, so they're aware that this is an issue.
Yes, when bills are implemented, we work with the different program areas to make sure it's incorporated onto the website, into our publications, into training, into customer services, talking points and things like that, so they have it at their fingertips.
For Con, you mentioned could be perceived as a retroactive benefit increase. Could you talk a little bit about that perception and maybe the interaction with PEPRA?
Sure. That's the reason we use the word perceived is because it could be a perception. Again, this is an earned benefit that they could have moved forward that is funded by the 0.25%. It's just in case somebody is looking at that, we wanted to raise it, that it could be conceived of in that fashion. PEPRA has to do with enhancing benefits for past service, and that's prohibited. Mm-hmm. This is a benefit that already exists. And so this is just removing a barrier for something that somebody may have missed out on. But again, if they had been within the time frame of the 3 years, this would have already been counted toward their benefit.
Okay, so no legal issues with it.
Not that
okay.
I would just add that you could also have the perception, because it is an earned benefit, that this is, in a way, a removal of a penalty.
Right, of leaving hours
exactly.
on the table. Okay, thank you.
Something you said confused me, Joycelyn. So I guess I better go back and just figure out exactly how unused sick leave is paid for. Employers are paying 0.25% more historically, since 1990 at least, for the cost of unused sick leave. Correct. But then you said it would actually cost $3 more to us to provide the sick leave?
So because the benefit is higher, that's what the normal cost of the benefit increases by that amount. So it's covered in essence, as much as the 0.25% is able to cover all, and that's for basic unused sick leave. So it's just a comparison of how much the benefit would increase by if an additional day of sick leave was moved forward that otherwise wouldn't have been.
So is it that the 0.25% that has been paid is not enough to actually pay for the benefit?
So my understanding is that the 0.25% may not be enough to cover basic sick leave, but I think that that was an agreement that was reached for funding of sick leave at the time. And so that's a larger discussion that.
I understand that.
Yeah. So the program cost is not saying that it's not covered by the 0.25%, but this is just how much the normal cost of the benefit increases by.
$3 per
day, per year.
And then is there any cost to the final employer?
Only if it is excess sick leave.
Only if there's excess sick leave.
Correct.
All right.
So it's more than the basic number of days that they get per year.
All righty. So then I would just like to leave it on the table that, well, first of all, what are you hearing across the street about this?
So
are you
it's
hearing anything?
Garnering lots of support. And so let me see, I heard, and then this is not official, I haven't seen it on any record, but different organizations that have indicated support to the sponsor or the author's office or CalRTA, CTA, CCCI, CFT, CSEA, and the Faculty Association. And no opposition has been noted. And like I mentioned, that the California Community College League has been in discussions regarding the bill and has not raised any concerns. And that's kind of coming from the employer side of things. And
so the list you just gave us are the supporters?
That's not an official list though, so they're not on the record that I've seen. I have not seen letters from them, but from the author's office and the sponsor, they have
that's what you're
commitments
hearing
from those groups or
and that's why they're not listed under support.
Correct.
Okay. I would like us not to lose sight that we have a huge population that this affects also that are not community college, and I don't want us to lose sight that somewhere down the line we should try to do something to remedy that also.
And you're speaking about the K through 12
yeah.
Teachers. Yes.
Exactly.
The rules are different for them, yes.
What do you say? I don't know.
What's the potential population? What's the ratio between part-time community college and the rest of our membership?
Right. I don't have that off the top of my head, but it's definitely smaller.
I thought the question was more, it's 5%, but I was curious what the percentage is of K through 12 educators that are part-time. That's the question I was curious about. Because you're asking about that, right?
No, I'm not asking about part-time. I'm the whole
Full-timers?
population, yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Okay.
Like what we've talked about in the constituency meetings.
Yes, gotcha.
All right. And if this is, because this is only pertaining to part-time?
It's pertaining to all community
actually is
college
every-
faculty.
It's all community college.
full and
Correct.
part-time.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what, so I'd like to take a look at. All righty. Rick,
wanna
thanks.
add
Do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, the proportion is roughly 3.5 to 1, 3 to 1 between active K through 12 and community college. And that includes administrative personnel also, so.
All righty, thanks. Appreciate that. Okay. So Grant, you know what I'm looking for, right, on that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. We need a position on the bill. The recommendation is neutral. Is there any discussion?
Support neutral.
Okay, we need a motion. All right, Sharon has moved and Karen has seconded. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the neutral, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Any abstentions? One abstention, and we have approved the neutral on that bill.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on to the next item. So it's attachment 3, and this actually has 2 pieces of legislation included in it, dealing with the repeal of the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset. So the first listed is Senate Joint Resolution 3. So it's a state piece of legislation that expresses the legislature's desire for Congress and the president to repeal the WEP and the GPO due to its impact on educational employees that are members of CalSTRS. And then HR 141 is the congressional bill that actually does remove the WEP and the GPO from the Social Security Act. And the recommendation from the recommendation from staff on both measures is support.
We have a couple of new board members. Do we want to talk about what the WEP and the GPO are so they understand it?
We can.
Yes. Erica, do you know about the offsets? Do you understand the offsets? Okay, you already know. And Keith, you already know.
Yes.
Okay.
Former Assemblymember Thurman, our current superintendent, actually wrote a bill last year.
Yeah. And Frank's no longer on the dais. I think the rest of us pretty much know what it is. All righty. And are there any questions? There's no one in line.
No staff recommendation.
Staff recommendation is to support. So it's been moved by Sharon and seconded by Harry. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? All right. We have approved the support on those 2 bills.
Okay, and we can have one motion on both. That works for me. Great, thank you. The next agendized attachment was HR 624, which is a federal piece of legislation that deals with insider trading and kind of good governance around that. And the reason this is on the agenda as an information item is that the chair and the vice chair, through their delegated authority, taken a support position on this bill. That was necessary because of the timing of when Congresswoman Waters, the author of the bill, needed to have some action on it and needed our support. So included in the packet is a letter that went to the Financial Services Committee Chair and Ranking Member. And so this is just a report back to the board, which is required by our policy when that delegated authority is used. And then following that, the legislative matrix is attached, and so that has the bills that we're tracking thus far this year. And I'll just give you a brief update on the 2 sponsored bills, which are basically 2 different housekeeping bills, so AB 644 and AB 1452. We are getting those amended to fix drafting errors, and they will be heard in Policy Committee toward the end of April. Then with that, I think that completes the agenda as it went out, and the next piece would be AB 1320 by Assemblymember Nazarian.
Okay, go ahead and explain that to us, please.
Sure. So AB 1320 by Assemblymember Nazarian is a bill that requires divestment from Turkish investment vehicles if there are federal sanctions related to Turkey not acknowledging the Armenian genocide. So the staff recommendation is to oppose, since that requires divestment upon those sanctions. It is a bit different than some because it relies on that action by the federal government, but we have taken an opposed position on this bill over the past 4 years. So AB 1410 3 years ago and AB 1597 last legislative session.
So real quickly, before we get into the discussion on the Nazarian bill, the letter that was sent on the bill we previously talked about that Sharon and I had approved. In our first iteration of the download, the letter was kind of tweaky. That has been fixed. So if you re-download your materials again, that'll come out. If you want, I take notes on all my download stuff. I know Sharon does. So if you want a clean hard copy of that without downloading your materials, just give send Danielle an email and she can send you out a clean copy of that letter, I'm sure. All right. So let's go back to Nazarian. Chris, looks like you want to weigh in on it, or are you here if we have questions?
Here for questions.
Okay.
Move staff recommendation.
Okay.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any further discussions? All in favor of the opposed, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed to the opposed, say nay. I know that sounds weird,
I
doesn't
know,
it?
that sounds weird.
All opposed
It's
to
like a
the,
double
all
negative.
opposed to the motion? And any abstentions? Alrighty, we've taken an opposed position on AB 1320.
Great, thank you very much. That's all the business for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are just moving right along.
Don't say that, don't jinx it.
Actually, we're just right on time. Alrighty. Julie, come on up. And you're bringing some guests, I see.
Today. Yes, it is. I'll move it closer, sorry. So we'll have two members of our bond financing team here today to provide you with an update and education on the bond issuance process related to the financing for our headquarters expansion project. So to my right is Kevin Savali. He is from Stradling, Yoka, Carlson, and Roth, and he's our disclosure counsel. And to his right is Mike Kramer from Montague DeRose and Associates, and he is our municipal advisor. And Mike will be presenting first today. Get his.
Disclosure Council, and so for the new
Define
board
what they
members,
are.
can you just kind of give us a, like, what his role is and what your role is with the bond financing? So new
Actually,
board
they're
members.
volunteering to describe themselves, what they
Perfect.
are, so
Love
if that's
that.
okay.
Just make sure you describe it, because we have new board members that weren't part of the expansion
Self-disclosure is
conversation.
pretty accurate. So that's good.
Okay, good morning. Mike Kramer with Montague DeRose. My firm is a municipal advisor to CalSTRS for the borrowing. So we've been retained to kind of quarterback the transaction, coordinate the working group on the financing. At the end of the day, our job is to structure the most efficient borrowing for CalSTRS at the lowest interest cost.
And I'm Kevin Savali, Disclosure Counsel. So what I help you do is to make sure you comply with the federal securities laws in connection with the public offering of the bonds.
Okay, so if I may, I would like to, I have about 15 slides to go through that provide an update on the financing plan for the bond issue and just some background on the bond plan in general for the board. So I will overview the financing team, discuss the financing terms we are currently pursuing. We have a diagram on a flow of funds for the bonds. I will briefly talk about the legal structure of the borrowing. We'll talk about how we're sizing the bond issue, the full amount of the borrowing, the expected schedule for repayment, how CalSTRS plans to sell the bonds later this year, and then wrap up with a discussion of the schedule. Then I will turn it over to Kevin, and Kevin will speak about CalSTRS SEC disclosure obligations with the borrowing. So this is the main financing team. So at the top, CalSTRS is the borrower, and under the borrowing arrangement, it's going to be a lease revenue bond, so they will serve as lessee, and the payments they will make for the borrowing will pass through to bondholders to pay debt service on the bonds. The bonds will be issued through the California Infrastructure and Economic Development Bank, also known as the iBank. They will serve also as the lessor for the lease transaction. The California State Treasurer's Office, they will serve as agent for sale, so they help oversee the whole process and ensure that CalSTRS, as a related entity of the state, gets the best deal on its borrowing. So Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe is the bond counsel, and their primary job is to prepare the bond documents, which we will cover later, but these essentially are the lease agreements and the trust agreement. Kevin Savali mentioned his role as disclosure counsel, and his presentation later will go in more into depth onto the CalSTRS responsibilities for disclosure. The underwriter is RBC Capital Markets. They were appointed about 2 weeks ago by the State Treasurer's Office as agent for sale. Their job is to work with us to package and structure the borrowing and then when we're ready for sale later this year, to actually interface with investors and price the bonds and place the bonds with investors. So the trustee was appointed as BNY Mellon. Their job essentially is to hold the bond proceeds, and as CalSTRS spends money on the project, they will draw money from the trustee-held funds, and once the project funds are exhausted and the project is completed, the trustee will then serve in a capacity of paying agent, where every 6 months they will be interfacing between CalSTRS to transfer money from CalSTRS to investors, to the bondholders. We expect to have ratings from 3 rating agencies, Moody's Investor Service, S&P, and Fitch Investors. So the anticipated financing terms, as I mentioned, these will be prepared as lease revenue bonds. That title in the first row there, I think will be the official title for the borrowing. The project, as you were very well aware, is the Phase 2 headquarters building. We're working with the cost not to exceed of $300 million at this point. That is the project cost only. It does not include capitalized interest on the borrowing or financing costs. So we're also working with the presumption that the building will be complete for occupancy roughly 2 years from the date the bonds are sold, so October 2021. The working group explored the possibility of using the existing headquarters building as the leased asset. There must be a leased asset in the transaction. So to avoid capitalized interest, we explored the possibility of using this building as the leased asset. Unfortunately, it didn't have sufficient fair rental value or market value to serve as the leased asset. So our targets were, in terms of market value, is the $300 million project cost. And the rental value would be the debt service on the bonds, which roughly right now is roughly $20 million a year. So the lease premises for the borrowing will be the project and the site upon it which it will sit. Because this is going to be a lease transaction, CalSTRS has the authority under the law to abate lease payments if it does not have beneficial use and occupancy of the lease premises. And that would be really effective after the project is constructed and occupied. Until then, we expect the capitalized interest to cover debt service payments. So the capitalized interest. So because as the lessee rather, CalSTRS is not obligated to make payments on a project that they currently don't occupy, what we do is we borrow for interest during the construction period. So our construction period is roughly 2 years, 24 months. So it'll cover that period, plus an additional 6 months to cover unexpected delays in that process. That additional 6 months gives investors comfort that if the project is running behind, that they still have these funds on hand to make the next interest payment. This is very standard for transactions of this type. So the bonds will amortize or be paid off over 30 years. Principal will amortize annually, and interest will be paid semi-annually. Of course, we're expecting these bonds to be state and federal tax exempt, which will greatly reduce their borrowing cost. Right now, we're operating under the assumption when we estimate borrowing costs that the credit ratings will be as follows. So Moody's A1, S&P A+, and Fitch AA. Our assumption here is based on the ratings currently assigned to CalSTRS enhancement program that it was operating a few years ago. So we're working off of those ratings. However, when we go in for the ratings later this year, we're going to be optimistic and seek higher ratings on the bonds, trying to get all these ratings into the AA category.